year 356 AD, on the night of February 8th, Roman soldiers burst through the doors of a church in Alexandria, Egypt. They were not there to worship. They had orders from the emperor of Rome himself. Find the bishop and arrest him. The church was filled with terrified people in the middle of a vigil service. Chaos erupted. Soldiers pushed through the crowd, and the bishop, a small man, slight of build, in his mid-50s, disappeared into the darkness. He had done this before. He would spend the next 6 years as a fugitive, hiding in the desert monasteries of Upper Egypt, hunted by the most powerful military force on earth. He used that time to write some of the most important theological documents in Christian history. His name was Athanasius of Alexandria. He was exiled 5 times by 4 different Roman emperors. He spent nearly 20 years of his life away from his bishop's seat, roughly half of his entire time in office. And he never once changed his position. The phrase that followed him across history and still follows him today is 3 words in Latin: Athanasius Contra Mundum. Athanasius against the world. This is his story. Welcome back. If you watched the last video on the Council of Nicaea, you already know that Athanasius appears at the very end of that story. A young deacon with no official vote, whose arguments help define what Christians believe about Jesus Christ. But the Council of Nicaea was only the beginning of his story. Today, we go deeper. We follow Athanasius from his childhood in Alexandria all the way to his death through 5 exiles, 4 emperors, and one theological conviction he refused to abandon. Let us begin. Athanasius was born around the year 296 AD in Alexandria, Egypt, then one of the greatest cities in the world, a city of philosophers and merchants, of Greek intellectuals and Egyptian mystics, of synagogues and temples, and the largest library on earth. There is a famous story about his childhood, almost certainly legendary, but worth telling because it captures something true about the man he would become. The bishop of Alexandria, a man named Alexander, was watching from his window one day when he noticed a group of boys playing on a beach below. They were moving with unusual solemnity. He sent for them. When they arrived, Alexander asked what they were doing. One of the boys spoke up. They had been playing church. Athanasius had been chosen as bishop. He had appointed the other Christian boys as priests, and they had been baptizing the pagan children. When Alexander pressed Athanasius on whether he had followed the proper form, the exact words, the exact ritual, the boy had done it correctly. Whether the story is literally true or not, the early church preserved it because it felt right. Even as a child, Athanasius seemed drawn towards the exact boundary where doctrine met practice, where theology met action. His parents gave him a thorough education. He was fluent in both Greek and Coptic, and wrote and prayed in both languages. He knew the Greek philosophers and was a master of biblical exegesis. He was at home in the intellectual world of Alexandria in a way few church leaders of his era could match. He came to the attention of Bishop Alexander and was taken into the household as a secretary, protege, and deacon. And when Alexander traveled to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, he brought the young Athanasius with him. Athanasius was perhaps 25 years old. He had no vote, but he had a sharp mind, a clear argument, and the courage to use them. As we covered in the previous video, the council was called to settle the Arian controversy, the question of whether Jesus Christ was fully divine or a created being, subordinate to the Father. Athanasius argued that the Arian position destroyed the gospel. If Jesus is a creature, he said, then God did not save us. A creature saved us, and that is not salvation at all. The council sided with him. Arius was condemned. The Nicene Creed was written. Athanasius' Contra Mundum had not yet begun, but the stage was set. 3 years later, in 328 AD, Bishop Alexander died. Athanasius became Bishop of Alexandria. He was around 30 years old. He inherited one of the most powerful episcopal seats in the Christian world, and one of the most dangerous. Alexandria was not a quiet city. It was a place where theological debates spilled into the street, where the crowds had opinions on the nature of Christ, the way modern crowds have opinion on football, where factions within the church had long memories and chapel bulls. And the Arian controversy, despite the ruling at Nicaea, was far from over. Here's what most people miss about the Council of Nicaea. The vote was decisive, but it was not permanent. Arianism did not die at Nicaea. It regrouped, it found new patrons, it rewrote its language, softened its edges, found new ways to argue that the Son was like the Father, just not the same as the Father. As a fierce defender of the Nicene faith, Athanasius was condemned, exiled, and restated 5 times throughout his life. He unwaveringly opposed all attempts to express the truth of Jesus' divinity as in any way less than that of his Father. The Arian bishops around Constantine were not idle. They brought charges against Athanasius, not theological charges, which they knew they could not win, but political ones. He was accused of refusing to allow grain shipment from Egypt. He was accused of mistreating rival clergy. He was accused of using violence against his opponent. Some charges were exaggerated, some were outright fabrications. But Constantine, aging and exhausted, and wanting peace above all else, grew impatient. In 335 AD, at the gathering of bishops at Tyre, Athanasius was summoned to account for himself. He refused to recognize the gathering as a legitimate council. He appeared before Constantine himself, and then he said something that astonished everyone in the room. He looked at the emperor of Rome and told him that if he exiled Athanasius, he would regret it, because without Athanasius holding the line, the church would be handed over to heretics. It was not the kind of thing people said to Constantine. Constantine exiled him anyway, to Trier, in what is now Germany, at the far edge of the empire. Trier was far from everything Athanasius knew, cold, remote, surrounded by a Germanic wall that had nothing to do with the theological debate of Alexandria and Constantinople. He spent nearly 2 years there, and then in 337 AD, Constantine died. The exiled bishop returned home to Alexandria. The city received him, by all accounts, with enormous celebration, but the victory was short-lived. Constantine's son, Constantius, who ruled the eastern half of the empire and was far more sympathetic to the Arian position, renewed the order of exile in 330 AD. The second exile sent Athanasius to Rome, where he spent 3 years under the protection of Pope Julius I. It was a significant period, not just personally but historically. Athanasius brought Egyptian monks with him. He spent 3 years at Rome, and his presence there had 2 great historic results. It introduced the Roman Church to Eastern monasticism, and it drew the Western bishop more firmly into the Nicene camp. He returned to Alexandria in 346 AD, after the death of the Arian bishop who had replaced him. The second homecoming was celebrated like the return of a king. It lasted 10 years. In 356 AD came the night we began, with soldiers bursting through the church doors. The clergymen managed to get Athanasius away and into the desert before the soldiers could reach him. He spent 6 years in the desert monasteries of Upper Egypt, Eden, protected by monks who believed in the same Christ as he did. Wanted by the most powerful man on earth, those 6 years in the desert were among the most theologically productive of his life. Surrounded by silence and sand and the rhythm of monastic prayer, Athanasius wrote. He completed his massive 4 orations against the Arians. He wrote his apology to Constantius and his history of the Arians, in which he described the Arian sympathizing emperor as a precursor of Antichrist. That last sentence tells you something important about Athanasius. He was not a diplomat. He was not a politician. He was a man of absolute conviction. And when he believed someone was betraying the truth about Christ, he said so, regardless of who that person was. It was possibly during these years in the desert that Athanasius met Anthony, the great hermit of Egypt, the father of Christian monasticism. He would later write The Life of Anthony, a biography that became one of the most widely read texts in the ancient Christian world. It would play a direct role centuries later in the conversion of Augustine of Hippo, but that is a story for another video. Then Constantius died in 361 AD. Athanasius returned again to Alexandria. The fourth exile came in 362 AD, this time ordered by Julian, the emperor who had abandoned Christianity and was attempting to revive paganism across the empire. Julius reported calling Athanasius a troublemaker and a contemptible person and ordered him expelled. Athanasius reportedly laughed. He told his friends, "It is a little cloud, it will pass." It did pass. Julian died in battle in 363 AD, just over a year into his anti-Christian campaign. Athanasius returned once more. At some point during the long years of exile, someone asked Athanasius how he could stand against the entire world. Every emperor was against him. The majority of Eastern bishops had signed documents condemning him. Even the Bishop of Rome had, at one point under enormous pressure, appeared to waver. Friends and allies had been scattered, imprisoned, or broken. He was exiled from the church 5 times by Roman emperor, spending almost half of his 45 years as Bishop of Alexandria in exile. His answer, in various forms across his letters and writings, was always the same. They hold the places he wrote once from exile, but you hold the faith. They are in the buildings, but outside the true faith. We are outside the building, but the faith is within us. He did not believe he was alone. He believed he was standing with scripture, with the apostles, with the testimony of Christ himself, and that the emperors and their bishops were the ones who were actually isolated, cut off from the truth that they claimed to represent. C.S. Lewis, who wrote the famous introduction to Athanasius' masterwork on the Incarnation, put it this way. His epitaph is Athanasius Contra Mundum, Athanasius against the world. It is his glory that he did not move with the times. It is his reward that he now remains when those who seemed so solid have passed into history. The Arian emperors, the Arian bishops, the compromising council, they are all footnotes now. Athanasius is a doctor of the church, a pillar of orthodoxy, the man the whole Christian world, Catholic, Orthodox, Protestants alike, point to when it wants to explain what it believes about Jesus. He refused to move, and the world eventually moved towards him. It would be easy to reduce Athanasius to a fighter, a survivor, a man who simply would not quit. But the reason he would not quit was not stubbornness. It was conviction rooted in a theology so beautiful, so coherent, so life-giving, that he could not abandon it any more than he could abandon his own faith. His masterwork on the Incarnation, written when he was around 23 years old, is still read today in seminaries and churches across every denomination. Its central claim can be summarized in one sentence he wrote: "He became man so that we might become God." That is the theological heartbeat of everything Athanasius defended. Here's what he meant. Athanasius argued that God became incarnate to save humanity from the corruption caused by sin, emphasizing that human repentance alone is insufficient for restoration. A creature cannot restore what only God can give. Forgiveness requires more than an apology. It requires the recreation of the very nature that was broken. So God did not send a messenger. He did not send a great prophet, or even the greatest of all created angels. He came himself in the person of the Son, fully divine, taking on full humanity. The Word who became incarnate is the very one through whom all things were made. As the Creator, He alone can recreate. And if the Son is not fully God, if He is a creature, as Arius insisted, then the Incarnation does not accomplish what it needs to accomplish. A creature taking on humanity does not restore humanity to God. It simply gives us a better creature. Athanasius saw this with stunning clarity, even as a young man, and never wavered. The theological disputants of the 4th century understood that what they believed about the person of Christ was the root from which their entire worldview grew. They were not arguing about abstract philosophy. They were arguing about whether human beings could actually be saved. Athanasius believed they could, and he believed the proof was the Incarnation, God entering human flesh, taking on death, destroying it from the inside, and opening a way out. This is what he was defending every time he was exiled. This is what he refused to surrender. The 5th and final exile was the shortest. It came in 365 AD, lasted just 4 months, and ended with Athanasius returning to Alexandria for the last time. He spent his final years in relative peace, writing, corresponding with bishops across the empire, guiding the church that spent his life defending. He died in 373 AD. He was in his late 70s, an extraordinary age for a man who had spent decades as a fugitive. He spent 20 years of his life in exile, away from his bishop's seat, but he never stopped writing and fighting to preserve the Christian faith. He died without seeing the final victory he had worked for. The formal condemnation of Arianism and the full articulation of the Trinity would not come until the Council of Constantinople in 381 AD, 8 years after his death. But the victory came. The theology he had defended at the cost of nearly everything became the foundational consensus of the entire Christian world. Today, when a Christian in Lagos or London or Manila stands in church and says, "I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten from the Father before all the ages, true God from true God, begotten, not made, of one substance with the Father," they are saying the words that Athanasius spent his life fighting for. Not because he invented them, but because he refused to let them be taken away. There is a lesson in the life of Athanasius that goes beyond church history. There are moments in every generation when the majority is strong, when the powerful, the educated, the respectable, the emperors and the bishops alike line up on the wrong side of a question that actually matters. Athanasius shows us what it looks like to see clearly in those moments and hold on. Not with bitterness, not with pride, but with a conviction rooted so deeply in what he believed to be true about God, about humanity, about the meaning of the Incarnation, that no amount of political prayer could uproot it. He did not move with the times. He now remains. If this series is meaningful to you, please do well to subscribe, because next we are going to Alexandria, but a different era. We are going to meet the man who took the theology Athanasius defended and built an entire intellectual framework around it, Constantine of Hippo, a restless, brilliant, morally complicated North African who became the most influential theologian in the Western world. The story begins with a stolen pair. See you then.